Dear companions of Sheesha Media, we are honored to have Mr. Damon Wilson, the esteemed president of the National Endowment for Democracy, in our exclusive podcast today at Sheesha Media. Mr. Damon, thanks for accepting our invitation to be on this talk show.
Aziz, it's a real honor and pleasure to be with you in particular, given your commitment to the Afghan people, and really look forward to our conversation and to having a chance to speak to your remarkable audience of Afghans.
Thank you. Mr. President, typically we start our conversation with a brief introduction to our guest speakers. Could you please tell us a little bit more about your early childhood, including the date of birth and early schoolings?
Okay, all right, we'll take it back. So, Aziz, it's interesting you asked that, because it is one of the reasons why I think I'm here at the endowment. I was born in Nashville, Tennessee, grew up in Charleston, South Carolina, and had a childhood in a rural community in North Carolina, so in the South, and grew up in an environment where the extent of our diversity was black and white. That was the nature of the communities I was in. And yet when I was in third grade in rural North Carolina, a young kid showed up whose father had been a dissident under Nicolae Ceausescu, the dictator in communist Romania. And in third grade, he became my best friend. I was very attracted, very interested in someone who had migrated to my community, had a completely different experience, and to learn by spending time with his family. I didn't really learn intellectually, if you will, in third grade, but I learned maybe perhaps in my spirit, my soul, my heart, what it meant for a family to flee from tyranny. And you flash forward, and growing up in high school in Charleston, South Carolina, one of my best friends was a family that, again, had fled from Iran, a Baha'i family, because it faced religious persecution and lost its freedoms in Iran, and came, resettled in my community. And again, spending time with his family after school, eating amazing Persian cuisine, really helped open my eyes to what it meant to live in a free society, something I took for granted at first, but also to see it through the eyes of those who had lost, had difficult suffering, had lost family members, and had seen communism or repression in action in their home countries. And so my childhood, I think, had a bit of an impact on wanting to work with the underdog and support those who were not able to enjoy the benefits of living in freedom.
Thank you. Given your background, I think this is a very interesting story of transformation as well, because having the experience of Ceausescu's, for example, tyranny, and again, to become the president of the NED, which is promoting democracy, freedom, and citizenship around the world. This is a fascinating story. Can you please help us to understand or to get a snapshot of this transformational journey of yours as a person?
Sure, Aziz. I mean, look, I felt, my family, my mother, very much ingrained in me a sense of commitment to service, public service, and helping others, just sort of ingrained in our family. And I went to University at Duke in North Carolina, got very involved with international foreign affairs. But this was a time of great hope, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the advance of freedom throughout much of Central and Eastern Europe, and starting to see the advance of a third democratic wave in Latin America and Africa. But it was also a time of great hardship, the Balkan Wars, the Rwandan genocide. And so I went and spent time living in the Baltic states in Estonia, its very first year of regained independence, and watched people that weren't much older than me reestablish democracy in the Baltic states. Very inspiring. But I also saw the horrible effects of ethnically based war in the Balkans. So I got involved with refugee work, humanitarian work, and I spent time in the Balkans. First, I just went on my own. Then I went back later as a student working for a UNICEF-backed project, the Unaccompanied Children in Exile. And this really sort of drove my commitment. I was interested in history and politics and culture, all of this. but wanted to be present and really involved in what were historic events. So after I graduated from Duke, I went to work for Save the Children, thinking originally that I might head back to the Balkans, but a genocide broke out in Rwanda, and Save was standing up a new program after the genocide, and I went and worked in Rwanda for a year right after the genocide. And again, at a young age, saw that despite press reports in the United States about, ethnic hatreds or historic tensions, I saw the reality was corrupt, power-hungry, often evil political leaders using rhetoric, propaganda, control, manipulation of their populations for their political gain. And I saw that unfold in a nasty way in the Western Balkans. I saw it unfold in Rwanda. And so I loved the humanitarian work. We were, frankly, working in Rwandan prisons, helping to connect children who had been separated from their families during the fighting, during the genocide. And in some cases, children that had to accompany their mothers into prisons in Rwanda, which were really awful environments, setting up preschools, helping them find family members that would take the children. And I realized at the time that I loved the humanitarian work, but I didn't want to always be neutral in these environments. I wanted to see what were some of the positive forces for good that could be supported to help prevent this type of behavior, to help stand up to such repugnant, aggressive leaders that could empower individuals and citizens to shape their own life. And so it led me both to go serve in the US government on how to prevent and stop and mitigate these conflicts. But it also had a direct linear pathway for me coming to the National Endowment for Democracy to stand up to these evil forces who were trying to control their own people for their power and inflicting such violence, such pain, such misery, and to stand by citizens that could shape their own life. And that's those experiences early in my career have a direct bearing on why I have such an affinity for the Afghan people and why I feel so comfortable in my skin at the National Endowment for Democracy.
This journey has been in an environment which has been out of balance, a world that has not been stable, at least in this history that as a person yourself gone through. Still, I think the world is out of balance and we are in need of that. What do you think has been the major factor behind this turmoil that we are always constantly experiencing in this world? And as a person who is working to promote democratic stability in the world, what is the one major factor that you would recommend, especially for the activists that they're working for democracy and they are trying to contribute with creating a balance in shaping a world which is more safe, which is more human for the individuals?
Aziz, this is a great question. It's both about the challenge and the opportunity. You start first with the challenge. You're right. We're in a difficult spot right now. You feel it acutely. Your listeners feel it acutely. Afghanistan's at the forefront of that. Part of what we've seen is really a global set of trends. I was talking about my career when we saw the opportunity in the third democratic wave. Well, the truth is that we've been in a bit of a rut for a while. But it's not just that. The past few years have been different. They're sharper. And what we've seen is not just well, first of all, accepting the reality of a bit of a populist backlash, a bit of struggling within established democracies, which is, I think, a direct corollary byproduct of globalization and interconnected world, people seeing how other people live, impact of inequality and dynamics of trade, all of this, both a social media environment that incentivizes polarization. So we've seen disruption in established democracies, but we've also seen a much sharper repression in closed societies. And I think this is part of the problem that's particularly acute right now. We used to know that nonviolent civic movements a majority of the time, 51, 52%, led to democratic transformations. Far higher percentage than actually violent resistance, which was only in the 20% in the 20s of success rates. And if you looked out 3 to 5 years afterwards, again, a much more successful rate for nonviolent movements. And yet we've seen since 2006 that this has begun to change. And it's become a much more hostile environment because autocrats have, one, learned to resist, crack down, and be much more violent in suppressing resistance, and two, to back each other up and support each other, both with legitimacy, moral backing, political backing, but also with the technologies, the tactics, and the tools of repression. And so what we're seeing in more recent years is a burgeoning degree of sharp repression inside closed societies, whether it's in China or, as you see in Russia, in Myanmar, Burma, in Afghanistan, incredibly large democratic diasporas that are fleeing these countries of a scale that we've not seen before. And you couple that with the inclination of these autocratic regimes to cooperate, work together, to share the technologies, tools, and tactics of repression. And all of this happening in a more globalized environment where information environment, the info space, often incentivizes polarization, where technology can be used like facial recognition. Now we're seeing potentials of artificial intelligence to repress, and combined with a much more sophisticated financial set of networks to support kleptocratic networks to protect the ill-gotten gains of dictators and autocrats, sometimes manipulating our own systems for their ill-begotten wealth. And all of this creates, to a degree, what Ned board member Ann Applebaum has written about as Autocracy, Inc. How have regimes led by China and Russia learned the tools of repression, but how have they shared and backed each other up globally around the world, having an impact in Nicaragua, in Venezuela, in Afghanistan, and Burma? And we see this cabal, we see the impact of this around the world.
You've been in politics in most part of your life. Can you recall the first time that you heard about Afghanistan and the first impression that you got from this country?
Well, I guess a couple of ways to think about it. I definitely, as a child, I was very scared by the standoff with the Soviet Union. I was because of my best friend in third grade, Ted Tatos, who fled communism, I was very anti-communist as a kid, understood that it was not a good thing, even if I didn't understand everything intellectually. I became very concerned about Soviet military strength. And I used to read almanacs and really study as a kid nuclear weapons arsenals that I was very concerned about. And so the Soviet Union's tactics, its support for communism, and its aggressive behavior on the international stage was something I was really attuned to as a kid, I have to say. And so the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and just understanding that difficult chapter, violent chapter in Afghanistan. Again, I was young, but it left a real impression on me. And I think that was my first exposure. Professionally, my first exposure, I would say, was more directly at 9/11. And in 9/11, I was working at NATO headquarters. I was the deputy chief of staff to NATO Secretary General Lord Robertson. And the day New York was attacked, we convened at NATO headquarters. And by the next day, the alliance had invoked Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, saying that an attack on one will be considered an attack on all.
You've been side by side walking through all the architects and the people that they have helped with the reinvention of Afghanistan. For me, as a civic educator, 9/11 was a new chapter. Even in my book, I termed that as the new history of Afghanistan.
Yes.
We had a new generation, when new sets of concepts and ideas that was introduced to the country. I think if we divide the contribution of the international community into two parts, one was in politics, dealing with governments, with the political realities on the ground, and one is with the grassroots democratic movements, especially with the population, with the people. The contribution of the international community to introduce new values to the Afghan people has been, I think, enormous. And because of these grounds that we found a new Afghanistan, after 20 years, we have a completely different picture of this country. In 2001, in Afghanistan, we didn't have even a single institution in the country to be named for the administration. We didn't have a single uniformed soldier in the country. We had just few women. One of them was, for example, Dr. Sima Samar. She was introduced as the vice president of Karzai in the interim government, and also as the minister of the women affairs. But in 2021, for example, when we were facing with a new challenge in the country, we had millions of girls, and thousands of them were highly educated and trained. They were individuals that they had been empowered. Yes, institutionally, they didn't have the protection, and because of that, they were vulnerable. But individually, they were widespread, not only in the country, but outside and throughout the world. So your contribution, I think, in this regard has also something that can be educational for Afghanistan. From the first days that you started your job to work on Afghanistan, and from the time that you also helped Afghans to evacuate, most of them were the grantees of the NED.
That's right.
And you became personally also engaged with that. What was the first and the last pages of this book for you?
Yeah. Aziz, what you share is so right. The extraordinary, while a lot of people see failure in Afghanistan, I see the extraordinary democratic gains that supported the awakening and the awareness of so many Afghans who view the world differently, view their own agency differently. And that's ultimately why I think you and I, worried about today, are going to be optimistic about the future. So look, you're right. My first trip to Afghanistan was in 2003. I spent many years then, when I was at NATO, welcoming Afghans to Brussels and really helping an entire alliance learn, myself included, about the history, the culture. It was a very steep learning curve to get to know Afghanistan more intimately, more deeply. So when I came to the endowment, I started on July 26, and just over 22 months ago. And when I started, Afghanistan was a very important program for the endowment. We were deeply committed and invested, had been under the Taliban, under their previous regime, had been strong supporters during a democratic opening that was tumultuous. And you're right, when, as the Taliban were moving forward, we were very focused on our support for the people of Afghanistan, for women, for independent media, and the remarkable gains. And so when Kabul fell rapidly and as more unexpectedly, or more rapidly than anyone really anticipated, I kind of felt in my gut that, one, I was, as an American, I felt a bit of shame, a bit of disappointment, a bit of anger, and how the United States was handling this. Frustration at the Afghan government and Afghan leaders, certainly how they had been handling it. But I felt an incredible sense of commitment and duty and responsibility to our Afghan partners, to those who were not corrupt, those who were not ambivalent, but those who had been out in the communities, in the cities, in the villages, helping to bring a better life, helping to engage communities, to educate people on civic responsibilities, democratic rights, ensuring that women had a seat at the table, ensuring that access to information that could hold leaders accountable, that could expose corruption. These people were doing the incredible day-to-day task of building a very vibrant culture of life and democratic life. The quality of the media, the vibrancy of the women's entrepreneurs, it was pretty remarkable, actually. And that's when I knew that we had to stand by our partners and do everything possible to support them in a time of great, great danger, great need, and disaster. We can talk more about that, but you're right. That happened 3 weeks into my job as the new president CEO. And I knew right then and there that our response in Afghanistan would define me, define the endowment, but more importantly, position the endowment to underscore that we will be the friend of the Afghan people. We will stand in solidarity and perpetuity for the Afghan people to preserve democratic gains and to know that they deserve their ability to demand that kind of future.
You and your team at the National Endowment for Democracy helped evacuate more than 1,200 people from Afghanistan.
That's right.
Now they are living in the United States, they're living in Canada and in the UK, maybe in some other countries, that they are receiving very good support from their host countries. But still, Endowment is a committed member of the movement to transform Afghanistan, especially for the women and those that they are regarded as the most vulnerable communities in Afghanistan. Ethnic communities, linguistic communities, religious communities, the people that they are suffering from a repressive type of ruling that is irresponsible, that is not paying any heed to the international norms of life. Do you feel that when these 1,200 or over 1,200 people, how much new resources have provided for this democratic movement in Afghanistan outside? And also, how can you fill the gaps of the presence on the ground in Afghanistan for your work? Because NED is trying to give a model for people to do their own job. It's not like most of the other NGOs that they are projecting changes in the country, or they are with the short-term programs working. NED is trying to help people to have their own contribution for their own life. And that needs people, that needs agents that they can implement such a long-term vision in the country which is turmoil, in the country which is lacking even the single means of protection in law. So how can you navigate between these resources that is now in the diaspora and also those people that they are still working on the ground in Afghanistan, and you are looking to support them, to help them to stand on their feet without losing hope and aspirations for their future?
You know, Aziz, maybe two parts to that question. The first, the evacuation. The second is NED today with Afghans. And first, you know, you're right that the people that NED supported, like yourself, those that worked for IRI, NDI, SITE, these are some of the most amazing people who have done so much to build a better Afghanistan. And in some respects, you could say there could be a conundrum. Why help so many of these amazing people leave Afghanistan when they're going to be critical to the future? But as you said, it's not really about us. It's not really our choice. I did feel that given the disaster, given my own country's role in all of this, I felt that the endowment is an independent institution, but based in the United States, that we needed to show the American people would meet their commitment to their partners and would stand by and support them. And so our partners didn't work for the United States. They didn't work for the US military. So they were not prioritized for SIVs, evacuation. And yet our partners were those, the reason the United States was enthusiastic about Afghanistan. Incredible women and journalists and organizations that were bringing Afghan democracy to life. And so it seemed perverse that, okay, if you happen to be a translator working for the military, you're okay. But if you're really an architect of Afghanistan's democracy, you would be in trouble. That didn't sit well with me. And so we felt, based on demand from many of our partners who made it clear that they wanted an option, that we needed to supplement. We needed to offer our own evacuation. So we had to ensure the authority, ensure that Congress would support our work and State Department understood, would be supportive of that. Our board had to commit finances to make sure that we had the resources to do this, because once you start, you can't do this at half. You got to do this the whole way. We had to make sure that we had security on the ground in a dangerous environment, working between Gutter and CENTCOM and others. We were very coordinated on the security issue. We had to have logistics. And thankfully, because of SIPE's presence and transportation networks that had been supportive of programs, we were able to have buses and logistics. And we had to have ability to run an operation. I come from an operational environment, and thankfully we had hired a remarkable global security officer who started literally concurrent with the fall of Kabul, who could help ensure that we had the capacity to run the operations, and we needed to be able to resettle people safely and quickly. And so I was able to call a few heads of state in Europe, Southeast Europe, and very quickly got yeses. Bless the Prime Minister of Albania and North Macedonia and Georgia. They all said yes right off the bat. And so it put it all together for us to be able to act to help support the relocation of over 1,000 people, as you say, who are now mostly resettled in Canada and the United States. But as you say, at the same time, Aziz, we made a commitment that we would be as proud of the endowment support for the people of Afghanistan going forward as we would be on our efforts to help evacuate those that chose to leave. And that's what we're doing. We have a very large Afghanistan program. We are committed to supporting those both in exile and especially those inside the country that really want to continue to work towards preserving democratic gains, whether it's in women's rights, whether it's in civic engagement, whether it's in access to independent media. So we're all in. And we understand that while we were able to help our immediate partners, there are millions and millions and millions of people that also deserve a better future. And we're not turning our back on them. We are doubling down, especially when many donors will leave or will all shift to humanitarian work. We won't. We're staying. We're committed. We're in this for the long haul. And as you say, Aziz, our model is not us. It's you. Mm-hmm. This is your country. This is your struggle. What can we do to support you and your efforts with your ideas, your innovation? You understand what you can do securely, what you've got the capacity to do, what the Afghan people want. We're not here to pick and choose or to tell you that, but we are here to give support to that. And that's what the endowment's all about.
Again, I will come to the approaches and the programs of the NED back in Afghanistan. Now, NED was not prepared for leading an operation.
No, it was not. It was not.
Yeah, and your mandate has not been in that field,
right.
trained, or the staff or people that they have been mentally equipped to lead such a big and complicated operation in a time of chaos, time of stress. Surely it needed a very strong and committed team. I was a witness of your friends that given the time difference, between Afghanistan and the United States, that they were awake mostly days and nights, and they were continuing their work. How did you find it challenging at that time? Because you're a person to lead and supervise all these activities, especially that it should not be harmful. It should not put your team and the people that you're helping to evacuate at rest there in Afghanistan, because anytime, at any moment, there could be a disaster. So how could you tell us about the challenges that you personally were facing and some of the personal stories that you can share with us about those times, those days and nights and minutes, sometimes even the changing seconds?
Aziz, it was, look, first of all, this was a harrowing moment for you, for your friends, for so many Afghans. And so it was a tough time for us, but there's no comparison, none. I had been in the job for 3 weeks. And one of the things I knew about the endowment, one of the things that makes this team special, is that our work is based on people. It's based on relationships of trust. And that's golden, because I knew at the heart of it that we knew our community, we knew our partners, and we know each other. And for me, man, this was a way that I got to know my team. You know, in a crisis, you learn the soul of an organization, you learn what people are made of. And this was something that no one at NED thought we could do. We're a foundation. We're not a evacuation organization, humanitarian organization. We're a foundation. We give out grants. It's very different. But we were able to marry new leadership, an extraordinary team that knew the partners on the ground intimately, with some incredible assets, a new security officer, put it all together. And because it started with the Afghan people and our dedication to you, our commitment to you. And we decided that as an institution based on relationships of trust, we were not going to just sit back and hope that you would be okay. Maybe someone could help protect you. Maybe there'd be a chance to evacuate other means. We wanted to stand by our partners. And
it's any moment in this time of operation that you would be awake because of a jerk, because of a sudden news that had come from the ground that there is
absolutely. I mean, it was a harrowing time. We were running operations, supporting them, as you said, in the middle of the night. And so we would be, I remember this was also during COVID, and I was working from my family's home in Charleston, South Carolina, downtown, old historic home in Charleston, up in the middle of the night, waking up my family, really trying to take real-time decisions on what to do about buses that are being stopped by the Taliban. Some of these painful stories that we really had harrowing moments coordinating with the Qatari embassy in the middle of the night in Kabul, which we did direct to the interlocutors on the ground, with CENTCOM, with the KIA actual commanders that were at the airport, and mostly with our own partners on the ground. And so very harrowing times, especially as you'll remember on the second convoy that was disrupted, a convoy that was disrupted by the Taliban. Our ability to marry our transportation network with the Qatari ambassadors' good offices to navigate Taliban checkpoints. But the negotiations broke down between the Qataris and the Taliban, and the agreements fell apart. And it was our partners, many of them, that had to pay a high price as one of our convoys was dispersed. We had 3 people that were detained by the Taliban, 2 were released relatively quickly, and 1 not. And man, I won't share all the details, but a lot of high stakes diplomacy to get this last person released. We were not going to take our eye off any single person. That's what we told our team, that we're dealing with human lives here. So we had a very rigid, structured process, strong command and control, strong data and accounting. We could vouch for everybody we were supporting. And we would keep our eye on the ball. And this is why, Aziz, we have seen this evacuation through to every last person to make sure they have a permanent home, they have a permanent situation. These are humans, as you know. And so you can't enter into this lightly. And that's why I'm so proud of the endowment team. I'm so proud of our Afghan partners, because the relationships they built over years in doing the work of democracy came into to be the relationships that were so critical for trust at a time of crisis. And it was pretty amazing to meet the Ned family that way, to meet our Afghan partners that way, and to see what the Ned team members were made of. Man, it was a place that told me I have taken the right job at the right time to work with the right people. We're here for a reason, and we're going to do proud by our Afghan partners as best we can in what is a horrific situation.
This question might be challenging, but you're free to answer or not. How many people did you have in the operation team for Afghanistan to lead and conduct this operation in a successful manner?
Look, there are a couple ways to answer that, but what we essentially did, the endowment is a staff of about 300 people. And we had over 100 people working on our Afghanistan task force because it was a surge. As you can see, we diverted a lot of resource and attention to focus, because if you don't focus on something big like this, you can get it wrong. We can't do that all the time. But in this moment, we knew it was historic, and we knew that we had to do something unbelievable. And so every team across the endowment contributed to the cause. Thankfully, we had about 8 Afghans on staff that could also work and speak all languages and make phone calls and talk to all the partners on the ground, and people who were not working on Afghanistan. They worked in HR, they worked in grants administration, and yet they were on the phone working with us in contact with people on the ground. And so we had a core operations team, we had an emergency coordinating group, but we had a cascading set of team members. This also then included the core institutes. We then had comparable teams within IRI and NDI and the Center for International Private Enterprise. I was doing regular meetings with the core presidents of all of our institutes in a coordinating fashion. We were then joining coordinating meetings with the evacuation team that was being led by CENTCOM every night, late at night, on call with CENTCOM to coordinate operations and to figure out how we could protect our people and how we could get them through. And so it was a Herculean task. And there was a handful of people at the center of that, from our Afghanistan grants team, our Middle East team, which was amazing, from our emergency response team, which was brand new and amazing, from our new security officer. It was just and some volunteers that were just remarkable. We brought some people back, even who came on board. Some former Afghans who had worked at NED before came back to volunteer and help. It was all hands on deck. Really remarkable effort.
Yes, and another challenging question, budget, because this operation was a successful operation. It helped over 1,200 people to evacuate from that very critical situation in Afghanistan. But this is not just the work of financial resources. Also, there is a leadership, there is a strategy to conduct this operation safely and smoothly. I want to know the total budget, the cost of this operation, to make comparison between other similar operations that cost maybe billions of dollars. But here at the NED, while it was not your mandate, it was not your field of expertise, but you did do that job as a way to give a model for using the resources in the best way, in the best manner. Can you give a very short answer about the budget of this operation?
Yes, this won't be a perfect answer because I don't have it all right in front of me, but essentially, when Kabul fell, I went to the board immediately and said, we need emergency support. And the board approved about $7 million right off the bat. We ended up going back to the board a few months later and increasing it to, I think, about 13 million. Now, for us, this was to finance the evacuation, including the evacuation itself, at certain point, charters, at certain security, But it also funded the resettlement costs, but not just resettlement, sustainment costs of the population in Albania, North Macedonia, and Georgia for an unknown period of time. And many of your audience know, some people were there for 6 months, some for a year, some longer, but the sustainment costs. But it also funded emergency fellowships that we could do. You were one of our emergency fellows. It also supported emergency support to our partners and their work, and financing for the programmatic work during the crisis as well. And new investments in media came out of this. So we were doing evacuation costs, sustainment costs, emergency fellowship costs, and Afghan programmatic costs, continuing to invest in Afghan organizations for strategy sessions and conferences to new independent media. And so our budget there was about 13 million. And you're right, it's a lot of money in some respects, but it's almost no money compared to governments and things like that that are talking about billions, not millions. It was a lot for the Med.
Coming back to the main part of our talk today about the education that NET can provide for the audience in Afghanistan. Actually, my introduction to the NET goes back to around 10 years ago when I came as a fellow to the NET. And it started with a very educational experience of mine. I had a 5 minutes orientation the first day when I talked that what would be my project there at the NET. There I had one sentence that in my journey, I feel that Afghanistan has gone through a very good, successful development in this 3 decades of change in the country. Then it was 3 decades from the communist coup in the late 70s, and then to around 1212. When I shared my impressions in some of these snapshots, they asked me to go and narrate that story of change in Afghanistan that led to my book, Let Me Breathe. I was not really prepared for that because it was a kind of memory that I was, as a trauma, I was most of the time skipping, and I was afraid to return back. It was very tough for me, challenging, but it became around 570 pages of book, and for Zeno, it became one of the best-selling books in Afghanistan. 4 editions of that went, and that was sold in Afghanistan. That was the first impression that I got from the educational method of the NET, that how it can inspire people and how it can show a way to go through. After that, we were receiving a small grant for a radio at our school called Radio Marifat. And throughout the times that we were receiving the grant from the NET, we were not told even a single time what to do or how to use that. They were saying that, okay, this is your job and how can you share your message for the people? This is the least support that or assistance that we can provide. Then it led to our SAW TV. That was the first edutainment channel in Afghanistan. And now it has new linkage with the Sheesha media because we have just an idea to help a community transformation project in Afghanistan to help people to come out of the era of violence, hatred, and fanaticism to a civil reconciliation ground that people can feel that they can have a different approaches. For me, as a civic educator, it is a kind of educational approach of the NET. But I want to really, from the perspective of the president of the NET, to share a little bit more insights about this type of program that you have at NET, because this is not just for Afghanistan, this is throughout the world. How can you share, this methodology or approach that can be easily applicable in different contexts in Afghanistan and regional countries there, or now in other countries such as Ukraine, for example, that can help them to get a better first-hand impression of the NED's approaches to democratic changes in the world?
Well, I think, thank you, Aziz, for sharing some of that as well. Your own journey has been a remarkable one of inspiration. And it's important to understand that your story, Aziz, and even the conversations that we've had, that's why the people here at the endowment do what they do, because they are connected to people directly with relationships of trust that bond us and invest us in your success. And so the ultimate idea of the endowment is, one, to help support the global infrastructure of democracy, but to recognize that democracy is diverse, that it has to be anchored in its culture and its country and its setting. And so that leads for us to be both very proud of our work, confident in the universal values that underpin this work, but very humble in the approach. Because it's not about the United States and Americans talking, sharing our, it's not that. It's about finding amazing people and organizations that are building democracy in their own way, in their own country, and saying, what do you need? How can we help? What's your vision? What's your plans? What's your strategy? How do you see this as advancing democracy and democratic values in your society? And how can we help you? So we call it a demand-driven process where the ideas, the programs, the strategy needs to come from you, from our partners, not from us. And you're right, it is about how to give oxygen to those people that are doing remarkable work, and often doing so in local communities in their own languages, sometimes very much in more remote areas outside capital cities, recognizing the independent organizations that are fundamental to a vibrant democratic life, and that they need to exist everywhere, and sometimes don't have the capacity to raise funds internationally from other donors. And so the endowment is really about this ecosystem of support for Democrats around the world. And our support comes in three buckets. One is financial. We make grants. But as you said, Aziz, oftentimes they're pretty modest. They're pretty small grants. And so the other buckets really matter. The second bucket is knowledge. It's learning. It's information. And so that's where we have a hub of activity of scholars and practitioners and researchers, political actors that all come together, the endowment, through the fellowship programs, through their scholarship, through the Journal of Democracy, really with an idea of how do we accelerate democratic learning. It's pretty clear the bad guys are learning, they're coaching each other. In fact, the editor of our Journal of Democracy has written a book on the dictator's learning curve. So the endowment is really part of the antidote, how to make sure that the good guys, that the Democrats are helping each other learn from their experiences and sharing their practices. The third area of support is moral support, public support, political support. And this is where the endowment is built on relationships. We will rally to find moral support. We will connect our partners with media, with Congress, to tell their story, to amplify their story. And we support the world movement for democracy to rally in common cause activists from around the world so that they have each other's back and can support each other. And this creates a pretty unique institution at the endowment. We're not just a foundation. We don't just cut checks for projects. We're more, in fact, I'd say we're less about projects and we're more about people. We're more about amazing, courageous people who have a fire burning in their soul and their spirit, who are yearning for a better future for their people, who understand that liberty, freedoms are fundamental to the quality of life that they want for their own children. And it's our job just to figure out, how do we give support and oxygen to that? How do we connect them with others in that fight? How do we connect them to the resources that are out there from others that have struggled through the same types of situations so that they can figure out how to apply it in their own circumstances?
Yeah, Afghanistan can be an exceptional case. I feel, especially given the restrictive and rigid types of ruling that the Taliban have applied on the country, because this is the only country in the world that pays no attention to the standards of the international norms. But for the NED, because you still have your connection with the people and you're committed to help a democratic transformation in the country to ensure the safety and the stability of the country and its people without facing them with the harsh and negative reaction of the authority, the ruling authority. What are the significant challenges that now you're facing with the ruling of the Taliban? And is it really sometimes restrictive for you? Or no, it just helps you to have a turning around, to cross some of the limiting barriers and to help people also to adjust themselves and to customize their big ideals with the harsh realities on the ground and to continue their work.
Well, remember, Aziz, and for your listeners, the endowment doesn't do any of this work. We're not on the ground. We don't have offices. We don't implement projects and programs. We support you, the Afghan people, in your work and in your activities. And so it really becomes a question for Afghans to determine, how can we be effective? How can we contribute to our country's democratic future? How can we support civic engagement? And so that then comes, that's what we invite to come share those ideas. And so we're seeing both. We're seeing amazing ideas of Afghans who have fled their country and yet still have strong ties and are doing things today that are really for the advocacy and support connected to the daily lives of people in Afghanistan. So we're working with many in the diaspora to support a more open environment inside Afghanistan to help them have access. Afghan people have access to independent information, for example. But we're also very willing to support those groups in Afghanistan that can continue to find space within which they can operate to do things that they determine they are able to do in an environment of Taliban control. And so we are seeing a remarkable situation. As you said, 20 years is a lot of time in which an incredible awakening of the population, civil society, and there is such a vibrant life, civic life in Afghanistan. The Taliban can't just put that back in a box. Mm-hmm. You can't unlearn your education. You can't unlearn everything that you've been exposed to through access to independent media. And so we are going to stand by Afghans that are creative, that are entrepreneurial, that are innovative, that desire a better future for their people, and are going to figure out in a safe way how they can advance in a nonviolent way the democratic prospects of the future of Afghanistan. Many people don't believe in that today. They think Taliban are in charge. They got it. Well, that's today. And that's just not how NED operates. We will always stand by people's sides, whether they're in open societies or closed societies, to support the constant work, the ever constant process of bolstering democracy.
You're the president of the endowment, and also you have a political activist background as well for yourself. You have been a democratic promoter for so many years, but still you're a human being and you have the characteristic of a human being. Has there been any moment to feel a little bit pessimistic about a complicated case as Afghanistan, to feel that it is out of our humanistic capability, that to go on with that? This is a time that we have to find other ways, or we have to retreat as the United States forces withdrew from Afghanistan. It's a time to leave it because we have lots of other commitments and there are lots of other works around the world. So we would not be giving up our works throughout the world. But this case is a little bit dangerous, risky, and counterproductive. Has there been, as a human being, has there been any time for you to look at that, or no? You have been still a realistic, optimistic person, given everything that is as a reality, without ignoring and neglecting the realistic aspect of that.
Aziz, because I'm a human being, because we are connected and work with humans, we're a human-centered organization. And because of what has happened to Afghanistan, we are doubly resolved in our commitment to the Afghan people. No, we will not back away from that. Now, it doesn't mean I'm naive. It doesn't mean that I think, oh, we're going to have a beautiful constitutional democracy in Afghanistan next year. It doesn't mean that. But it does mean that my resolve to support Afghans in their own journey is rock solid. So the last thing we will do is say, Afghanistan is so depressing. Taliban are in control. It's a mess. We've wasted a lot of money there over the years. Let's move on. That will not happen at the National Endowment for Democracy. We are going to stick by those Afghans that believe that their country can tap the potential of its people, all of its people, 50% of its population that's female, that has been started to taste the taste of freedom and education, and to be able to harness that towards a better, inclusive, diverse Afghanistan that doesn't look like what we see today, right now, led by the Taliban. They're in charge. It's a point of time. It's just a point of time. And so we're in it for the long haul. Are there days when I'm upset or pessimistic or concerned? You bet. When we see partners executed in Burma, when we see partners picked up and imprisoned in Belarus, when we see the repression in Hong Kong to Tehran, it's not good. It's tough. We're people. We're human. But it puts a fire. It makes that, it's like throwing logs on a fire. Mm-hmm. That fire gets bigger inside us, more resolve. So I've got a very, very strong set of burning fires inside me to understand that it might not be today, it might not be tomorrow, but because of the commitment we make to support Afghans now, that there's going to be another chapter. There'll be another chapter.
Yeah.
When Afghans have a chance to write this next democratic chapter, it's going to be more successful because it will have something to stand on, and it will be able to stand on the democratic gains that people like yourself, all the women you helped educate, all the children, the children that were on your radio show, they will be a firmer foundation for the next chapter of a democratic Afghanistan.
You're not instilling the idea of revolution at all, but you are promoting an evolutionary process of change in the country, which comes with the contribution, with the commitment of the people on the ground. Because of that, you're not in haste. You are not pushing something to produce some results overnight. But there is also a question of strategy, because mostly people, when they are in the first stages of their growth, as in Afghanistan, when they do not have a clear-cut strategy, when they do not know how to move on and to carry on their missions well, they might lose the time, the energy, and that will be disastrous in the long run, because then you will have the negative impact of that on the people, especially on the children or the youth, that they are looking to the future, but they feel that everything is facing to a deadlock. So the strategy, especially when it comes to the NED mandate, becomes very important. What is the strategy of the NED to help Afghan people to learn and to believe in the power that they have grown and nurtured in this 20 years, and lots of other changes that has happened in Afghanistan and around the world, which creates a different picture for this country compared to 20 years back. This is really educational, but what is the strategy that the NED can introduce to the people of Afghanistan, the person like me, to share that with my audience, with the generation that I'm working with in Afghanistan, to be optimistic and also to be more practical, to be more functional in a way that is more productive, it is more process-oriented, through a very good end at on their democratic journey?
Look, in some respects, we're not going to give you a grand strategy for Afghanistan because we're going to look to you, strategy for Afghanistan. We're going to look to you, your partners, many other Afghans out there to articulate, what is your vision? What is your theory of change? How do you see the future here? So we're committed to support Afghans that are going to push for a more democratic future through nonviolent means and find a way to achieve this, understanding that for today, it may mean ensuring that there is at least a competitive information environment so the Taliban don't have the ease with which they can just dominate the information coming out of Afghanistan and manipulate it for international narratives for their own people. There is a learning cycle that takes place as well that Afghans can learn, understanding that access to information is actually a building block for democracy. Because if you don't have the ability to have information to think critically about the situation you're in, you're not able to hold the leaders to account. And we see, as Afghans will learn, and so many are learning, in so many societies that are closed, there can still be a responsiveness and accountability for government, even dictatorial regimes, understand that to some degree, the legitimacy of the people is fundamental. And so there is a way to push issues of accountability and have incremental progress, to have a protecting of certain civic space, of certain individual liberties. But it will have to be defined by Afghans what works for them in the Afghanistan of today, drawing from the lessons that they can learn in the NED family from our other partners, from the Journal of Democracy, from our forum that does research. But it will have to be Afghans relating it then to Afghanistan. And so that's for Afghans to answer more than me, Aziz.
Yeah, and your impression for democracy and democratic change is not just something in the head of an academic person in the university or some of the think tanks. You've been a practitioner as well. You've had a first-hand impression from Rwanda, from Balkan states. You've been engaged with the countries that they have been going through challenges, at least in this 20 years, that has been the significant experiences of your personal life as well. What are the lessons that you can share with us from some other countries, such as Rwanda, for example, Balkan states, and Afghanistan, both in terms of the negative aspects of the events and also some of the positive aspects that the people can look at that as an energizing factor, and they can look at that more as a supporting belief rather than limiting beliefs?
Sure. I mean, first leadership matters, and we see that in negative and positive consequences. And this is why the agency of individuals is so important, because we've seen, historically speaking, leaders who are power hungry, who want to dominate for themselves, all of that, can manipulate systems, can manipulate tensions for great evil. And yet we see that the actions of a small group of people who mobilize to try to counter that, to provide alternatives, that's what leads to change. People getting engaged. So leadership matters, agency of individuals matters. Second is the international community's role matters as well in terms of, are you willing to provide support? And that's why I'm here at the endowment, not because I think the international community can determine the outcomes. I think we've seen time and time again that doesn't work. But the international community can support local solutions, can support local voices that are pushing for something that can be a more sustainable pathway to democracy. Democracy does not get imported from abroad. It's not parachuted in. That's not going to work. We can support indigenous support efforts to build a more democratic set of institutions and cultures. Finally, the biggest lesson is really the agency of people writ large. And we've seen leadership can be bad or good. The international community can sometimes be bad or good. It's the agency of people and understanding that if you are engaged, if you are demanding, if you force your institutions and agencies to be responsive to citizen interests, to hold leaders accountable, to consume independent information, to engage in political processes, to engage in community activation, to vote, even when it's a not a fair election, as we see in Thailand, an election that's stacked against independent voices, where the military has stacked the decks, and yet the Thai people turned out massive numbers to rebuke the military. It's just awesome. And I think understanding that ultimately people working together can shape their own future. It's the most powerful force out there, and it's one that inspires all of us. And I think that's where I'd bring this to a close, Aziz.
Yes, we have a challenging journey ahead of us. Still, there are lots of ups and downs, but let's think about a marathon race and our journey for democracy, and look at the ending point in 2030. What Damon Wilson will have a message for the people to tell, especially the Afghans, that our next destination is 2030. We'll be joining back then in Afghanistan, in a new country, in a new environment with new generation. Assume that you are standing there and you are one of the people that in this marathon race will be celebrating and also will be appreciating some of the efforts that has been made there. What is your picture of that time moment, and what is the message that you will be delivering at that special occasion in Afghanistan?
Aziz, that's a beautiful thought. I'm so eager to go back to Kabul and to go back to Kabul with you, with people like you, and to spend time with the incredible hospitality culture of the Afghan people in their home country. And so, look, 2030, I hope by 2030 that we can be able to say, look, we've come through a really tough patch. We went through a dark chapter, and now we are entering a reawakening, what you could call a democratic revival, what historians will ultimately one day, I hope, call the fourth democratic wave, historically speaking, and that Afghanistan will find its path in that fourth democratic wave. And so in 2030, I hope that we are on the ground in a way that we can feel that, sense that, appreciate that, and understand that Afghans, by changing themselves, by changing their own nation, by embedding their own sovereignty in its own people, where the people are the source of legitimacy, that Afghanistan will carve its democratic future as part of a historic fourth democratic wave, a democratic future that will be Afghan-led, created, and therefore sustainable, durable, not brittle, not subject to the same pressures of corruption, and not dependent on the same outside support. And that's one that I'm going to be, with great humility, ready to celebrate with you.
This is a wonderful message for reinvention and transformation. Looking forward to see you there.
Aziz, thank you so much, my friend, and thank you for what you do for the cause of freedom and to support the Afghan people and their ability to shape their own future. It's beautiful. Thank you for having me on the show.
And it was our honor to have you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.